he rode past his wife. In front of the entire realm, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen urged his horse forward, past Princess Elia Martell, past the woman who had given him 2 children, and laid a crown of blue winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark, a girl he had no right to choose, a girl promised to another man. And in that silence, as every smile in the yard died at once, the world began to end. Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Mysteries of the Realm, Episode 2, The Tourney at Harrenhal, 5 mysteries no one can solve. The year was 281 AC, the year of the false spring. After a long winter, warmth crept back into the world. Flowers bloomed, snows melted. The realm believed the worst was over. It was a lie. The spring was false, and the hope it brought would prove one of the most dangerous illusions in Westerosi history. Because in that fragile warmth, someone called a tournament, the greatest the realm had ever seen. Lord Walter Went of Harrenhal announced prizes so lavish, they drew lords and knights from every corner of the 7 kingdoms. They came to the same black castle Aegon the Conqueror had once melted with dragonfire, the same vast, cursed fortress that seemed to destroy every house that held it. But from the very beginning, something did not fit. Lord Went could not afford those prizes. Someone else was paying. That is the first mystery. Not romance, not prophecy, power. The histories note that Sir Oswell Went of the Kingsguard, one of Rhaegar's closest companions, visited his brother Lord Walter shortly before the tourney was announced. That timing is not subtle. It points to one theory, that Prince Rhaegar secretly funded the entire event through the Wents. But why? One answer is a great council. A gathering of lords hidden beneath music, feasting, and jousts, meant to confront the truth everyone in the realm already knew. King Aerys II was growing dangerous. Since Duskendale, his fear and cruelty had worsened. He trusted no one. He rarely left the Red Keep. The kingdom could feel madness settling over the throne, and this was not Rhaegar acting alone. An alliance network was already forming across the great houses. Stark betrothed to Baratheon. Stark betrothed to Tully. Ned and Robert both fostered by Jon Arryn in the Vale. 5 of 7 kingdoms were linking themselves together in ways Westeros had rarely seen. Some have called this the Southron Ambitions Conspiracy. Whether the lords had a specific plan or were simply preparing for the worst, the marriages tell a story of their own. Rhaegar may have meant Harrenhal to be the moment when these great lords quietly chose a different path, a peaceful transition, a new order without bloodshed. But Varys learned of it. And Varys told the king. Now, Varys is a mystery in himself. Why did he warn Aerys? Was he protecting the crown? Or was he protecting something else? Years later, we would learn that Varys had been working with Illyrio Mopatis to place a hidden Targaryen, or a Blackfire pretender, on the Iron Throne. If Rhaegar's peaceful counsel had succeeded, there would have been no rebellion, no fall, no exiled prince for Varys to manipulate. By sabotaging the council, Varys may have ensured that the Targaryen dynasty would destroy itself, which was exactly what he needed. One whisper, one spider, and the course of history turned. So Aerys did the one thing no one expected. For the first time in years, the Mad King left the Red Keep and rode to Harrenhal in person. His presence was surveillance. His arrival was a checkmate. If Harrenhal was meant to host such a council, it never happened. Years later, before riding to his death at the Trident, Rhaegar would tell Jaime Lannister that he meant to call a council after the battle, and that he had meant to do it long ago. Long ago. At Harrenhal, where peace may have been possible, and where war was born instead. And here is the counterfactual that should haunt anyone who studies this story. If the council had happened, if Varys had stayed silent, there would have been no kidnapping, no murder of Brandon and Rickard Stark, no Robert's Rebellion, no sack of King's Landing, no murder of Elia and her children. The entire story as we know it never happens. All of it was preventable. None of it was prevented. But politics was not the only force moving through those 10 days. Something older was there too. Before the tourney, a young crannogman named Howland Reed had traveled south from the Neck. But he did not come directly to Harrenhal. First, he went to the Isle of Faces, that sacred island in the God's Eye, where the pact between the first men and the children of the forest was sealed in the deep past. The Green Men still watched there. Howland stayed among them through an entire winter. What they told him, what he saw, what he carried away from that island, the books do not say. But there are theories. Some believe the Green Men granted Howland prophetic visions through the Weirwood network. Some believe they sent him to Harrenhal on purpose, that the children of the forest, who could see through time itself, needed someone at that tourney to ensure certain events unfolded. Others say it was nothing more than prayer and meditation, a pilgrim visiting his faith's most sacred ground. George has never said, but when Howland finally arrived at Harrenhal, he came as a man who had passed through something ancient. At the feast in the Hall of 100 Hearths, he sat with the Stark children. There he watched Rhaegar play his silver harp, a song so beautiful and so sad that Lyanna Stark wept openly. When her brother Benjen laughed at her for crying, she poured wine over his head. Nearby danced Ashara Dayne, the most beautiful woman in the hall, if the old stories can be trusted. She danced with Barristan Selmy, with Oberyn Martell, with Jon Connington. And when Brandon Stark spoke on behalf of a brother too shy to ask, she danced with Eddard Stark, the quiet wolf and the laughing star. It was a beautiful night. That is what makes Harrenhal so haunting. Everything still looked beautiful. Then came the next mystery. On the following day, 3 squires tormented Howland Reed, boys from Hay, Blount, and Frey. Bigger than him, crueler than him. Boys certain that a small man from the swamps did not belong in their world. They knocked him down, beat him, humiliated him, and Lyanna Stark stopped them. She scattered the squires with a tourney sword and brought Howland back to the Stark camp. That night, the crannogman went to the God's Wood and prayed to the old gods for the strength to avenge his honor. And the next day, a mystery knight rode into the lists. Think about that timing. Howland prays, and the old gods answer. Short of stature, wearing mismatched armor that seemed borrowed from different men, and carrying a shield painted with a white weirwood tree whose red face laughed. The face of the old gods themselves. The Knight of the Laughing Tree. The knight challenged the 3 men whose squires had dishonored Howland Reed. One by one, each of them was thrown from the saddle. And when they came to ransom back their armor and horses, the knight spoke in a booming, clearly disguised voice and demanded only one thing: teach your squires honor. Then, by the next morning, the knight was gone. The armor vanished. The rider vanished. Only the shield remained, hanging from a tree. So who was the Knight of the Laughing Tree? This is a mystery George has never confirmed. He has smiled at it, deflected it, said that many readers have figured it out, but he has never put an answer on the page. The strongest theory, and the one with the most textual support, points to Lyanna Stark. She was short, a young woman of 15 who would have needed borrowed armor. She was, by every account, a rider of extraordinary skill. Ned once said she might have carried a sword if her father had allowed it. Another man said she was half a horse herself. Jousting, as the histories note, is 3/4 horsemanship. Against 3 unremarkable knights, a gifted rider with fury in her heart might have been enough. But there are objections. She was 14 or 15. She had no confirmed jousting training. Could a girl that young really unseat 3 grown men? Some believe the knight was Howland Reed himself, empowered somehow by whatever the green men gave him on the Isle of Faces. He had the strongest personal motive. He prayed to the old gods the night before the night appeared. But crannogmen do not joust. They fight with nets and frog spears, and Howland was even smaller than Lyanna. Others have suggested a collaboration. Lyanna rode, but perhaps Brandon coached her on lance technique, and Benjen helped procure the armor. If that is true, it adds a devastating layer. Because if Benjen helped his sister ride that day, and that single act set off the chain of events that killed their father, their brother, and Lyanna herself, it might explain why Benjen Stark later took the black. Not duty, guilt. A boy's penance for a kindness that accidentally burned the world down. And there is one more clue that haunts this mystery. Ned Stark never told his children this story. Mira Reed knows it from Howland, but Bran never heard it from his own father. Why would the most honest man in Westeros bury a tale of justice and courage? Unless the knight's identity leads somewhere Ned could not allow anyone to follow. Because the night leads to Rhaegar, and Rhaegar leads to a tower in Dorne. And that tower leads to the one secret Ned Stark guarded with his life. But there is one detail that matters even more than the knight's identity. King Aerys was furious. In his madness, he believed the laughing face on the shield was mocking him. He declared the knight a traitor and sent Rhaegar to find the culprit. Rhaegar returned with only the shield. But that leads to the third mystery. Did he find more than he admitted? Because if the Knight of the Laughing Tree was Lyanna Stark, and Rhaegar discovered that truth, then something extraordinary happened in those woods. The Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms found a highborn girl still in armor, fierce enough to risk herself for a stranger's honor, brave enough to defy every convention her world held sacred, and he chose to protect her. He brought back the shield and told his father the night was gone. If that is what happened, then Rhaegar did not first notice Lyanna as some distant beauty across a jousting yard. He found her in armor, and Harrenhal did not begin with romance. It began with recognition. On the final day of jousting, Rhaegar won the tourney. He defeated great knights one after another, including Sir Barristan Selmy, who had hoped to win and crown Ashara Dayne, Queen of Love and Beauty. But Barristan did not win. Rhaegar did, and then came the moment no one in Westeros would ever forget. He rode past Elia and laid the crown of blue winter roses in Lyanna's lap. Ned Stark would remember it for the rest of his life. That was when all the smiles died. So now we come to the fourth mystery. Why did Rhaegar do it? There are 3 theories, and they pull in very different directions. The first is simple: love. Rhaegar heard Lyanna weep at his music. He saw her beauty. He was captivated. But this is the weakest theory on its own. Every witness describes Rhaegar as deliberate, bookish, melancholic, not impulsive. A man who became a warrior only because his scrolls told him he must is not a man who humiliates his wife on a whim. And then there is the evidence of the flowers themselves. Blue winter roses grow only in the glass gardens of Winterfell, thousands of miles from Harrenhal. If Rhaegar chose those specific flowers, he planned this in advance. The crown was not a spontaneous gesture. It was a decision. The second theory is prophecy. Years later, Daenerys would see a vision of Rhaegar speaking over his infant son and saying that there must be one more, that the dragon has 3 heads, that his child was tied to the song of ice and fire. The Maesters had told Rhaegar that Elia could bear no more children. If the prophecy demanded a 3rd child, a child of ice and fire, Stark and Targaryen, then the crown of blue roses may not have been reckless passion. It may have been purpose, destiny, as Rhaegar understood it. And there is a detail that deepens this reading. In that same vision, Rhaegar speaks these words in Elia's presence. He tells his wife, there must be one more. If Elia understood what that meant, if she knew before Harrenhal that Rhaegar would seek another woman, then the crowning may not have shocked her at all. The books are silent on her reaction. The Martells, who should curse Rhaegar's name, direct all their fury at the Lannisters instead. That silence may tell us more than any accusation. The third theory connects everything. If Rhaegar discovered that Lyanna was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, then admiration for her courage came first, and love and prophecy followed. He saw a woman brave enough to fight for justice. He felt something genuine, and he recognized in her the Stark woman that his reading of prophecy demanded. 3 forces, courage, love, and destiny, all converging in one person. Perhaps even Rhaegar could no longer tell them apart. And perhaps that is why Harrenhal remains so tragic, because love and prophecy may have become so tangled in him that the act was both his most human moment and his most destructive. Then there is Ashara Dayne, the 5th mystery. Years later, Sir Barristan Selmy would carry Ashara Dayne's memory like a wound that never closed. He had loved her, silently, for decades. She died, never knowing. He once said that if he had unhorsed Rhaegar and crowned Ashara Queen of Love and Beauty, she might have looked to him instead of Stark. A different crown, a different fate. But Barristan did not win, and Ashara looked elsewhere. He says she was dishonored at Harrenhal, and after the war, she threw herself from the Palestone sword at Starfall into the sea. But the story fractures the moment you touch it. First, which Stark dishonored her? Barristan says only the word Stark, never a first name. Most assume Ned. They danced at the feast. Elia Dayne, Ashara's own sister, told her nephew that Ned and Ashara fell in love. And when Catelyn once asked Ned about Ashara, it was the only time in all their years that he ever frightened her. He told her never to speak that name again. But the word dishonored sits uncomfortably on Ned Stark's shoulders. Consider Brandon instead, the wild wolf, a man known for taking what he wanted. Barbary Dustin says plainly that Brandon took her maidenhead before riding off to his next duty. He had fathered bastards. He approached Ashara first at the feast before introducing Ned. And the word dishonored, taking a high-born woman's virtue with no intention of marriage, fits Brandon perfectly. If it was Brandon, then Ned's journey to Starfall after the war takes on a different meaning entirely. He went not for romance, but for duty. To return Dawn, to take responsibility for his dead brother's sins, to do what honor demanded. And that may be why the Danes, despite Ned being involved in their greatest knight's death, named a child after him. Not because Ned dishonored Ashara, because Ned tried to make it right. But here is where the mystery deepens. Ashara's body was never found. George himself has asked, do we know for certain that Ashara Dayne is dead? Some believe she jumped and the sea took her. Some believe she faked her death and vanished, perhaps to the neck, where Howland Reed's wife, a woman named Gianna, who has never once been seen or described in any detail, has lived in a castle that moves through the swamps. Others believe she crossed the sea entirely. And what of the child? Barristan says a daughter, stillborn. But Barristan was not at Starfall. He is repeating what he was told. And in this world, what people are told is often exactly what someone needed them to believe. If the child lived, then somewhere in this story, there is a son or daughter of Ashara Dayne, a child with the blood of the most beautiful woman in the realm running through their veins. And no one knows who they are. These are questions without answers, only silence. And in this world, silence is never innocent. Within a year, the whole realm was in motion. Rhaegar and Lyanna vanished together. Whether by force or by choice, no living voice has ever settled with certainty. Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing in fury. Aerys burned him and his father alive. Jon Arryn called his banners. Robert Baratheon lifted his hammer. And nearly everyone who had gathered at Harrenhal was swallowed by the war that followed. Rhaegar died at the Trident. Elia and her children died in the sack of King's Landing. Ashara fell or vanished. Lyanna died in a tower in Dorne, whispering her last words to Ned Stark. And the child left behind was raised as a bastard who never knew the truth of his blood. All of it traces back to one Tourney, one false spring, one cursed castle. And at the center of it all stands Howland Reed, the Crannogman who prayed, the man who was there at the feast, there for the mystery night, there for the crowning, and later, there at the Tower of Joy. He is the only character in this entire story who was present for all of it. The only living thread that connects the Isle of Faces to the Night of the Laughing Tree, to the crown of winter roses, to the birth of the child in the tower. George has said Howland Reed will never be a point-of-view character because he knows too much. Think about what that means. Not that he knows one secret, that he knows so much that even seeing his thoughts would unravel the story. He knows who the Knight of the Laughing Tree was. He knows what happened at the Tower of Joy. He may know what the Green Men told him on the Isle of Faces. And he may know how all of it connects. The prophecy, the prayer, the roses, and the child. He has remained in the neck ever since, hidden in a castle that moves through the swamps, carrying knowledge that could change everything if ever spoken aloud. And he does not speak. So what do I believe? I believe Lyanna Stark was the Knight of the Laughing Tree. The clues are overwhelming, and her identity is the only one that explains why Ned buried this story so deep that his own children never heard it. I believe Rhaegar found her in those woods, and that what he found changed both their fates. I believe the tourney was meant to save the realm, and I believe it destroyed everything it touched instead. I believe Brandon Stark dishonored Ashara Dayne, not Ned. And I believe Ned went to Starfall to do what his brother never could. I believe Ashara's story is not finished. The body was never found. George himself has questioned whether she is truly dead. And in this author's hands, that question is never asked without reason. And I believe Howland Reed knows truths that would reshape the way we understand the fall of the Targaryens. Not one truth, all of them. The full shape of the mystery, from the Isle of Faces to the Tower of Joy. But until the page turns, these remain what they have always been. Mysteries. 5 of them. Buried in 10 days at Harrenhal, beneath a spring that was never real. So tell me this. Who do you think was the Knight of the Laughing Tree? Write it in the comments. I read every theory. And if you want to be here when we unravel the next mystery, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter.